All right, team, it is officially here. This is my 3.26 Lightning Conduit Elementalist mouse and keyboard PC Windows OS 360 hertz Asus monitor mouse mat custom built desk custom keyboard wireless G Pro mouse league starter. And yes, I'm aware it's difficult to breathe while saying the full name. I am working on it. Anyways, originally, I wasn't going to do League Starter Guide because I was worried that this build was just not going to be that great and it was going to have a bunch of rough points here and there and it wasn't going to be up to snuff, I will say. But after doing a bunch of POBing and League Start practice runs and that sort of thing, I think this build's going to slap. It's not going to be anything like the meta builds, like Fissure of Snaking or whatever. That's probably going to be absolutely insane in comparison. But this will still perform very solidly well. I still think I'll hit T17s on day 3 or 4, something like that. I have nothing but confidence in this build and that can do all content. So, like I said, it's not going to be as good as what the, your other insert favorite streamer here is doing. But who cares, That's the best part. Who gives a fuck? I'm playing Lightning Conduit. Fuck it, we ball. Overall, I think this build is just a great all-rounder. It starts off strong. It scales into the late game very strongly. You can send it to hundreds of millions of DPS. You can do all content on it. It's got great clear, great single target. It's pretty fast. It can get unbelievably tanky, like disgustingly tanky if you want it to be. It can again hit those crazy 100 million DPS numbers. It's not going to scale like some of the meta skills or anything like that. Obviously those will go way harder with far more efficiency, but again, we're trying to just does it fucking work? Yeah, no, this build will slap. This build will do very well. Now, to go into some of the cons of this build, there are quite a few. First and foremost, it's a 2-button build, and actually deploying Orb of Storms and then using Lightning Conduit is fine. That's not the hard part or the annoying part. The annoying part is when enemies are very mobile and you have to constantly recast Orb of Storms. It can get kind of annoying and it does interrupt your DPS, and Orb of Storms goes away and then you're not DPSing. Having this like constant 2-button requirement can be a bit of an issue, and I will say there's a bit of like a skill curve to it. There's a lot of like Orb of Storms manipulation and timing that you'll need to have that you'll just flat out die because you just don't do it right. That will be a thing that will happen, so that can be kind of frustrating. To piggyback a bit further on this, there's also going to be a ton of positional and spacing requirements, which can be really annoying. Like, I would say this is going to be one of the more difficult builds in PoE that I personally have ever played. I'm sure there's harder builds, and I'm sure this isn't that hard to some people. For me, I've played quite a few different builds, and while this does have a lot of nice things for it, there is kind of like a skill check pretty consistently. Like, are you at the proper range for your Orb of Storms? Are you setting it so you can dodge the boss? Are you redeploying it in a spot where you're going to be able to actually cast Lightning Conduit on top of it? That sort of thing. And I personally enjoy that, by the way. I like the difficulty of it. I like a bit of a challenge. I like being a bit more active. But I would say if you're kind of looking for like a brain off mapper or a brain off bosser, this kind of isn't that, at least early on anyway, or probably anywhere near like the mid or maybe even the early late stages of the game. I think later on, yeah, it'll probably fucking do whatever you want. But what doesn't at that point, right? If you throw 3 mirrors at something, you can probably fucking hold your dick and kill Ubermaven. It's fine. Also, another big con, while it's also its biggest pro, is Lightning Warp. As Jesus said unto Moses, those who live by lightning warp will most certainly die lightning warping into a pack fucking all the time. It's just the price of doing business. You can use something else if you want, if you're a huge pussy, or you can join the men and lightning warp to your death over and 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 over. Again. Fuck, it's tight. We go over the mechanics of the build and how it works. You drop Orb of Storms, and Orb of Storms, anything in this radius or very close to, it'll shock everything, and it'll chain a bunch of shocks out to all the mobs near you, and then you will hit Lightning Conduit, and then Lightning Conduit will activate all the shocks and kill anything that is shocked by Orb of Storms. Essentially what we do is on our Orb of Storms, we stack a bunch of ailment effect. We want to increase the effect of shock onto the target, so we start with Unbound Elements. Supportive skills have 52% increased effect of non-damaging elements. That would be shock. Then we take Overcharge, shocks enemies as though dealing 680% more damage. So we use these two things in combination to apply massive shocks to the target, and that is because with Lightning Conduit, it scales its damage based off shock effect. 24% more damage with hits per 5% of shock effect on enemies. So very simple. You just shock the fuck out of it and blast it with Lightning Conduit. It is a 2-button build for this reason. Another layer of scaling that we use in this build is Golems. Golems are getting quite a big buff in the next patch. Elemancer is getting removed, but we are gaining the immune to elemental damage and the additional golem summon on Liege with the Primordial. This means for 2-point investment, we'll get 4 golems in total, and all their effects or buffs. I'll show that in the config a little bit later. Golems are just really good early on. They are, in fact, insane early on. This is the first node that you take, and you get them quite early. I believe it's in Act 4, I want to say. And that is another way that we get just a ton of early game scaling out of them, and you will feel it once you get them. They also act as little tanks. Stone Golem will go in and get fucked up for you, which is actually really nice. Our main movement mechanic is Lightning Warp. Lightning Warp is actually very fast once you get it going and you get the supports and the gem leveled a little bit. It also crosses distances that are very, very wide. It can get to places that I don't think any other skill can get to. I think it even outranges Leap Slam, but don't quote me on that one. And realistically, Lightning Warp is actually quite safe if you just do it in short little ranges. The problem comes is that the urge to shove your cursor in the corner of your fucking screen and close your eyes and mash it is just, it's unbelievably potent. And it's like, why the fuck would I warp here when I can warp off screen to my death? And then you'll do that all the time. You'll most certainly die more often than not. You'll be like, God, lightning warp fucking sucks dick. But then you'll keep lightning warping, and such is the great cycle. For this build, I wanted to do a bit of a proof of concept for the early game, so I ended up doing a speedrun Katava kill. I'm not actually a speedrunner. I don't know how to speedrun the campaign. I'm not very efficient. I've never actually watched anything. This Katava kill occurs at 5 hours. That's with all my ascendancies done. That's with 22 out of 24 passes because you get the last 2 from killing him, and it's at 5 hours. The problem with this is that it's on an account I've already done. I didn't use any of the thing that I already had, but I was able to skip all the actual trials in game. So I mean, just throw an hour on. I don't really give a fuck. I just kind of wanted to get it done and over with. So yeah, I'll say like a 6-hour Katava kill, which again is not very good, but for me that's like insane. That's the fastest I've ever done the campaign, even remotely close. I have no knowledge of how to actually do it. I did include in the build guide a step-by-step campaign run. It's not like ultra handholdy, but I figured there would be a lot of new players coming in from PoE 2 that are fairly capable, that just need kind of a little bit of direction. And again, I'm not a campaign expert. I'm sure there's a bunch of dumb shit I do in there. I have a disclaimer written in the notes section, but it is there in case you need it to help guide you. I figured having something is better than nothing. Another test that I like to do with builds whenever I'm making them is I always like to see how they do raw out of the campaign in just a high level map. So in this case, this is a different character that ran the campaign. I did a few maps afterwards, I believe in level 71, and then this is a T12 map that I just threw this character into, and she's completely raw, a bunch of dog shit gear straight from campaign. Nothing special. I actually took off the 5 link that I found in campaign. I also removed my ring slot because I had a barracks respite, which is why this video starts a little bit later, because barracks respite, or whichever one transfers shock on death, is a completely different form of clear than you would expect otherwise. It's actually really nice, I'm not gonna lie. Another thing that I do is I take off Shaper of Storms, because Shaper of Storms is getting gutted in the update for 3.26. and it gives you a ton of damage in this version, so I wanted to take that off so I'm not showing you damage that you don't actually or will not actually have. Another thing is I take off Wrath and I put on D-Term just to again show the damage raw as fuck. I will say another thing to point out is that this is not done on the speedrunner. I think the speedrun character, the 6-hour Katava clear, would have done a far worse job, because not only were they way lower level in this map, they also just had far less gear. But I think this version is probably a lot more applicable to what the average person will experience, what you will experience, especially if you run a slower campaign and you level a bit more. This is a lot closer to what you can expect in terms of your power level. And again, we're missing a ton of shit. There's just a ton of shit missing. This is 3 golems. Overall, I think this test went unbelievably well, and I think this character is insanely strong out of campaign. But of course, without further ado, let's jump into the thing that everyone wants to see, oddly enough. No one gives a fuck about the gameplay, they just want to see the POB. So I do include a multiple leveling POBs, 1 through 28, a 29 to 48 when you actually swap to Lightning Conduit, because you don't start with it, you get at level 28, and then I include a critical strike swap, because eventually you have to get off of Elemental Overload, because it's a DPS loss quite quickly, although early God Elemental Overload is disgusting. But yeah, here's that tree. This is for the end of the campaign, and then I also include in the skills, I have your early skills, so your level 1 through 28. I do have to make some changes to the notes, we'll get to in a second. This covers all your early miscellaneous gems. I do need to change this to Flame Dash. I think Flame Dash fucking slaps. It's way better for this build in particular because you have to reposition so consistently. I include a level 29 through 68. This goes through all the links you're gonna need. I will need to fix this because this is a little fucked up. but it also goes through your miscellaneous gems, the gem list for Act 6 that you need to buy, your lightning warp setup, and then, of course, the notes. This is what I mean by giving you a full campaign rundown. This goes through every single act. It's just go here, grab this, make sure you get this, make sure you do that. Like I said, this is probably not optimized at all. It's much better than having no idea how to do it, but it's probably far worse than an actual optimized speedrun strategy. But like I said earlier, it's regardless. It's just there so you have something to work off of. I am going to color code a lot of this, so I'll put all the gem stuff in white. All of the quests that have a skill point that you need, I'll probably put that in a different color. I'll make sure I label all the areas for your ascendancy trials in a different color as well, so you kind of have different ways you can speed read it if you want to. I still need to finish this and go through and change and add some things. I will be updating this POB consistently over the next couple of days. Well before the league will start, it will be ready and have everything that I want it to have. I'm going to do a ton more notes. I'm actually going to go through all the different POBs below this and make sure I go through all the different item sets and that sort of thing. But yeah, this is just what I have for now. This is why this took so long, by the way, because I've never actually done this before. It was really cool too, because I was able to optimize the campaign, for what little I can without actually watching, a bunch of speedruns and that sort of thing, because actually fuck doing that. In terms of the gearing, I include obviously multiple different item sets. I don't start with anything in the campaign. I actually talk more about the gear that you need in the campaign in the actual notes. I start the gearing at early maps. This is what it looks like. I really tried to not over embellish anything and oversell a lot of this stuff. I mean, this is actually a pretty good fucking one. Like, if I do these ones, I'm not gonna lie, this one might be a little much. But I tried to just kind of, low roll everything. Everything is unfortunately quality. I should change that. It doesn't really matter, right? This is just to give you something to work off of, or a general idea of, like, you want armor ES. These are kind of the stats you want on a wand. Obviously, +2 to levels is ideal, but who the fuck's gonna get that? That sort of thing. And then I progress it as we go. Also, before we go any further, try to ignore these numbers on the side. They're not really accurate right now. And that's because of all the config settings, which I will get into in a minute. And I'll set the config so you can actually expect or know what we're looking at here, and I'll do that step by step. But two things I wanted to mention are two major cons of this build that I failed to mention earlier. First and foremost, this build uses a lot of uniques. Now, fortunately, most of these uniques are cheap. None of these are really crazy expensive. A Void Battery, I think, is probably the most expensive item here at like 3 or 4 div early league. A Ravenous Passion, your guess is as good as mine. I have no idea. This might be really expensive. It might be not expensive at all. I also include a Crown of the Inward Eye. You can buy a low rolled one of these, a literal 9%er. Who gives a fuck? Just, you need the helm to just sit there and take the slot. It doesn't really matter. These shouldn't be too expensive either, especially if you go for a lower roll. We don't give a fuck about getting 21% increased max life mana global energy shield. And then, as far as I know, Ephemeral Bond, Graven Secret, Shimmeron, these are not very expensive at all. I think Ephemeral Bond's like 1C. And then another thing is Ralakesh. This one is a big up in the air. I have no idea. It's not the end of the world if a power charge Ralakesh is really expensive. We don't need to have these boots. I'll include a POV that doesn't have this, but hopefully they stay around their normal price of 1 or 2 div, or they drop. We'll just have to see. Another thing that is really toxic about having a ton of uniques is that this build requires a lot of stats. You'll see in the config, I just threw all the suffix stat that you would need, and that's because it's just easier to do that than it is to put it on every single individual item. But this is something that is a bit dicey, especially because there's just so much stat requirement with strength and dex. That's kind of one of the reasons I wanted to run a Ravenous Passion, is because Ravenous Passion has a strength roll on it, which is really nice. But something to keep in mind, that's all this is for. There's not lightning res on this, unfortunately, because again, the config is fuck. It depends on Doriani's. If not, the shock is way too high right now. This is not at all what we'll be looking at. But yeah, I wanted to make sure you guys understood that this does use a lot of uniques, and that is kind of toxic as fuck. This is not the end of the world, by the way. If it is the case that you can't fit all of your suffix stat in, say, like the 5 to 10 div setup, there are plenty of options to move around this. Running, just off the top of my head, running a Purity of Elements is always an option, especially because I don't actually solve for ailments in this yet. I'll include that in one of the later POBs. But yeah, this isn't the end of the world. It's just to show like what this is actually for. Anyways, these are all the different item sets to give you a general idea of the direction you're trying to head. Try not to take this divine value as gospel. I don't know how the cost of these things are going to be. It depends on what time you need them or where you're at in the league, that sort of thing. I know I said Ralakesh was 1 or 2 divine earlier. That was a misspeak. It's definitely going to be probably 4, 5, or 6 early on, but we still have to see how they're going to change dependent on the new changes that happen to them. But yeah, overall, this is just to give you a general idea of where you're going and what things are going to look like. There's a bunch of accompanying POBs in terms of the passive tree that go along with each of them. I'm not going to go through all these right now. What my actual plan is in the notes, I'm going to go through and write a bunch of notes on each of the different combinations of, okay, you're going to use these skills, this item set with this tree, and then I'll explain some stuff in there, explain your different options, that sort of thing. I'll probably go a little bit more into pricing. And yeah, I plan to do all that in the notes. This is just to give you a general idea of a direction of where you're trying to go. I'll also include kind of like a mirror setup and a bunch of extra experimental trees, like a full damage tree and then a full tank tree. Go over the config really quick. The config is just going to be completely fucked because it depends on whichever build you're actually using or where you're at. For example, you wouldn't have 65% of shock on any of the early mapping builds or early gearing sets. This is probably going to be like 40 at the absolute most, maybe even lower. 35 will give us a little buff, you know what I'm saying? But again, as an example, I'm using the mid-map CI setup. I have my level 85 CI swap, and then I'm using the mid-map skills. I only have a 4 link. You could maybe assume a 5 link if we want to, boost it up a little bit, maybe hit a milli, whatever. It's not a big deal. It really doesn't fucking matter. The point is here is that all of this is relative to what your settings actually are. I will make sure that you know how to set this up in the notes. But for example, right, we're going to take off the spell damage buff. We're going to take off the other spell damage buff for Spell Echo and Arcane Surge because we're not actually fucking using it in here. So we don't want to set it here. Also, levels matter. I only have quality on Lightning Conduit, that sort of thing. So there's just a lot of little settings that you can do. And again, I'm not trying to sell you a fucking pipe dream here. One thing I do want to point out, though, that a lot of people talk about for Elementalist is how it's not tanky. Incorrect. Build is tanky as fuck, actually. These numbers are accurate, and a lot of that, and pretty much all of it, comes from the changes to the Ascendancy, and it's because I'm not taking Mastermind Discord and Heart of Destruction. Like I said earlier, your damage is solved for you automatically out the gate. All we really care about is getting tanky early so we can get our levels faster. But to give you an example, this is kind of where you're going to start. It can be really tanky, not a whole lot of damage. You don't really need to worry about it. But we go from here to, let's say we hit the 20 to 30 div gear set. And then boom, here you are. This is your DPS. This is all super, like, completely attainable. Ignore the Orb of Storms calculation here. I don't actually know how to account for Orb of Storms. I just know, like, it hits whenever you hit with Lightning Conduit. Okay, so if we hit 7 times a second, assuming I know what the fuck cast rate means. Honestly, like, let's just not cheese it. It really doesn't matter to me. Fucking turn this bitch off. I don't know how to account for Orb of Storms DPS. It does exist somewhere in the ether. You'll just have to figure that out. Good luck. But anyways, nothing here is crazy. Probably the craziest item is a fucking Ravenous Passion with a maximum power charge. I do have some Awakened gems in here. I have 3, but it's all the cheap ones. These are all like, 4 or 5 div a piece. And again, these don't have to be here. They're just obviously fucking hella good to get. And they're really cost effective for the buff that they give you. This level 20 Lightning Conduit, maybe we go up to level 21, right? Boom, 2 million DPS. Maybe you can't afford that. Okay, fine. Maybe we're broke as fuck. Maybe we just need regular elemental focus, but we can't actually get elemental focus. So we just take power charge on critical. Fuck it. Right? Now our DPS sucks ass because we're missing that. But again, the point here is to not be a snake oil salesman, say some bullshit. Config, shock is at most 45. Okay? Because we started at 40. As your damage goes up, you'll apply higher and higher shocks. Maybe we go to 45. Maybe we're fucking crazy. We hit 65. Nope. Absolutely not. You're not even anywhere close to 65. You're probably not even close to 45. But, we don't fucking know that. I'm just going to set this bitch up. Fuck it. But yeah, overall, this is super achievable. This is something you can do in T16, just a classic T16 farming strat. Nothing here is crazy. At least I don't think it is. I remember these being like maybe 3 or 4 div. They're not too wild. Again, you just have a ton of options. There's a ton of ways to build damage. There's things you can do. Referring to tankiness too, I said earlier that the build is really versatile. To talk about versatility for a minute, just for a quick second actually, because there's so much of it. There's a ton of different ways you can do this, right? If you wanted to go full damage, say fuck this, my max hit's fine. Let's just hit some Mastermind at Discord. Maybe we say, all right, actually, I don't even give a fuck anymore about Shaper of Flames. Screw this. Take off these 4 points here, right? Boom, bing, bong, bang, get hard. Actually, no, dude, fuck Convergence. Don't do any of that. Actually, skip all that. Convergence can kiss my ass. This shit sucks dick. But the point is that you have options, okay? If you want more tankiness, you got it. If you want more DPS, you got it. Shut this shit off. Bing, bong, bang. You can do whatever you want to do with this build. You can scale anything. I said earlier that I'm going to add in a max damage and a max tank POB. That is so you can understand the ways you can scale your stuff. There's still some other stuff. I'm not going to go into Aegis Doriani. This is like a way later endgame thing that I'll get to. I'll explain it all in the notes. But overall, that's pretty much everything for the POB. If you guys have any questions, I will be streaming this the entire time of the league. I will make sure I take this build to the fucking moon. So you can always find me at my Twitch channel once the league starts. Of course, right now I'm busy making videos. And also, I will make sure to update this build as I go, the POB. And I mean before the league starts. This POB is not finished yet. I just wanted to get this video out so you guys had something to look at and kind of play around with. I'm going to do a ton more work on this, get a bunch more POBs, trees, item sets, all that, get the skills actually set up because some of these are just dumb as shit. And I'll explain how the config works, that sort of thing. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys. I will make sure I get the POB complete in the next coming days. It'll probably be done either tomorrow, very late, or early Thursday. I have a ton of work I still need to do in it. And I'll let you know in the description. I'll put completed or something so you know it's the finalized version. Make sure you check back with it before the league starts because I will have that done, like I said, sooner rather than later. That's all I really have for you guys for right now. I hope you guys have a good league start. Godspeed and deuces.